Welcome to Dysfictional, the RPG-focused podcast that should have probably picked Skilled as their origin feat. I'm Randy, the Random Generator.
I'm Ginger, professional film industry victim.
I'm Tukey, former academic, gone... Yeah, I'm a ranger.
Good.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still alive, so, yeah.
Unprecedented.
Yeah, that's... Man. I mean, I almost killed one of you, so it didn't have to be you this time. That's nice.
Yeah, it does feel weird that it's not me dying all the time. But yeah, no, it's good.
Next time I'll have to cut you in half. We're talking about halflings today.
Hey.
That was kind of a low joke.
It's my best one yet. Yeah, we're going to talk about halflings. They're...
Great.
And that's the end of the podcast.
Yep.
It was the way you said there.
It's fair. They're halflings. Like, little humans. They actually have almost the same distributions as humans. They're just smaller. So they're kind of a little more distinct than, say, like a child or like a gnome or something. They tend to be very vibrant and happy and appreciate the little things. It's mostly halflings for you. They have a nice lore with, I think, Lord of the Rings. Hobbits are kind of like halflings. Not exactly the same stature, but I think if people think of a halfling, it's most likely a hobbit. What about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I do a lot of things with the Elf Choir every year in the convention circuit. But as far as halflings go, the origin story of the halfling is that the term hobbit was trademarked. So whenever they were trying to build races for these fantasy games, they couldn't say that they were hobbits, but they are definitely inspired directly from hobbits.
Yeah.
The Tolkien estate is really famous for not licensing out things almost ever. And if they do, it's like very restricted things, which, fun fact, as a film person, I could tell you is why the Rings of Power plot makes no sense, because
they don't have access to a lot.
Yeah, all they had licensed was the rights to the appendices, which is basically cliff notes on a bunch of events that no one ever wrote about. But yeah, so that kind of happened here with the halflings. They wanted hobbits in the game, and they said you can make your own hobbits, and so this is what happened. But overall, yes, like you said, like super sort of happy, still sort of like of the earth, very farmers, artists, artisans. And one of the things that I found interesting about them is that they kind of universally don't have, like you said, a region, but they live kind of all over wherever there's society. And their sort of special skill is blending in so that they don't draw attention, which is why a lot of their sort of features and traits lean into stealth. Yeah.
And depending on where you're looking at, some of them aren't big fans of adventures and stuff, but some of them do kind of crave. They have a sense of bravery and courageousness more than most races, despite their stature. So they kind of tend to lean in towards journeys and discoveries and adventures that I think really sets them a unique area where they're always considered like almost like an underdog in the world. Gnomes at least have like inventions and this unique smarts that they could probably outsmart their foes, but halflings don't really have like that edge except for being courageous at the sense of something bigger than them, which is most things. I think that's a fun trait to them that a lot of classes don't have that kind of feeling.
Yeah, it actually shaped their history a bit. So I was kind of looking into far back a little bit more, and there originally used to be some negative views towards them, but essentially through their bravery, through their loyalty, all their hard work, they essentially now are very well regarded. Some travel, some don't, some settle. The ones who do settle, they might also settle in communities of basically other communities, so human communities, elven communities, dwarven communities, gnomish communities. So yeah, they basically now, halflings in the world have very good reputation based on, like you said, kind of using that bravery that they had to change people's opinions of them. You also mentioned about their personality. So besides just like the bravery and loyalty, they are typically more of a kind-hearted, light-hearted people in general. They do tend to be, I don't know if this is necessarily for all of them, but alignment-wise, I think a default for them is lawful good.
I think similar to orcs, where they used to be an evil race, they've sort of strayed away from that. I think if nothing else, it's kind of like a good guideline. You would consider halflings almost always on the side of like some sort of good. Doesn't mean you have to play them good. You can still find a way to play them evil or however way you want to, but it's a good guideline to start off with them. And that's kind of how I would probably tailor them myself. I do have a fun idea later about their happy mindsets being a little bit different, but yeah, aside from that, I probably would just play them fairly normal. We had a halfling in our party at least once, and it was the likable person of the group and kind of honestly, he was actually also a healer. So it kind of had another aspect of him just being this lovable healer, the one that keeps everyone entertained and deals with cooking and stuff. It was, and yeah, that's kind of what I expect from a halfling, I think.
We didn't necessarily talk about their like physical, I guess, traits yet, but they, I believe, reach adulthood around 20, and then they live longer than humans.
Yeah, at least 150. Yeah.
Yeah. So they do have a little bit of a longer lifespan. And then, of course, the size-wise, I think the average for them is somewhere around 2 to 3 feet. Their average weight is somewhere like 35 to 40 pounds, and they are small.
Yeah.
By nature, size instead of medium. Their speed's a little bit lower too, I believe. I think their base speed is 25.
It was, but the update, everyone's speed is 30, including dwarves, and I think gnomes might have been lower, but they've now baselined everyone to 30.
Oh, that's actually good.
Yeah.
I think that's weird.
It is, but in terms of this is where the mechanics of a game kind of overrides the weirdness of it. Because it was a little bit of an unfair advantage to even just 5 feet, especially for martial characters. A little tangent there, but like that's kind of why they did it, because a dwarf running at 25 feet sucks when you're like, well, if I had that extra 5 feet, I would have got him. Especially with dash. And now it's 10 feet.
No, it makes sense from a mechanic standpoint. And I guess nobody really got pulled back, right? Like, I don't think there were any races with a base of more than 30.
If anything, I think something like an Aarakocra or something, their fly speed was reduced, but that's a fly speed, and that's already extremely powerful, so that makes sense. I do think that other races eventually can get more speed. I know this is, again, more of a tangent, but there are races that can get more than 30. I think wood elves still get up to 35, for example.
Interesting. Well, anyway, speaking of things that halflings have that others don't, they have a lot of built-in sort of features and traits. One is that they're lucky. I think that that's a really good thing to have when you're picking a race. If you want to always have that luck roll on you, you could just be a halfling and just have that.
Mm-hmm.
Their size, the fact that their size is small, actually does give them advantage on some things. Tuki is finding out now, as he's playing a Haragon but refused to make it a small size, that it would have actually been convenient a couple of times if you had been fully committed to just being small.
Yep.
Look, he's like over 4 foot. Okay, he's not small.
You were so excited to say you finally had a character that wasn't like the tall character, but it's for your race. It's still a really tall character.
Yeah.
No, he's on the lower side. I think Haragon were 4 to 5. I made him close to 4. But this is the first character I've had under 6 foot tall. So,
but he's still medium. Yeah. So halflings are small, which is good. It gives you the ability to sneak by in someone else's space, take cover behind your medium or larger size party members, which is great in combat. You get a lot of stealth bonuses, a lot of advantages from being small. So especially now that apparently your base speed is still 30, I don't see why you wouldn't want to be small.
So a unique advantage with halfling. So if you're small, well, you can always move past like an ally one size larger than you without penalty. However, with them, they can move over any creature that is one size larger than them, which is unique because you usually can't move past enemies.
Right. Unless they're embiggened and shoved into a hallway like a cork, which is what happened to us last week.
Yeah.
But as for the sort of clans of halflings, there's the Lightfoot halfling, the Stout halfling, and then the Sword Coast Guide added the Ghostwise halfling, which I think is one of the more interesting ones. I had not actually heard of this until we started reading up on these guys. But the Lightfoots are naturally stealthy, and they're the ones that are in the most places in the Forgotten Realms. They have spread the farthest, so they're the most common variety of halfling. The Stout halfling is a little more hardy. They have a little bit of poison resistance, and it's not a full resistance, but it's resistance to poison damage, but also advantage on saving throws against it. Supposedly, they may have some dwarven ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And they are also known as the Stronghearts. And then the Sword Coast Guide added the Ghostwise. The lore behind them is pretty cool. Basically, their ancestry traces back to a war among halflings that split them and sent the ancestors of the Ghostwise tribes off to be alone. So they're a little more isolationist. They're a little bit more tribal. One of their like sort of trademark things is that they have warriors known as the Night Gliders, and they bond with and ride giant owls, which I think is like the most kick-ass thing.
And get a little bit of telepathy.
Yeah, their special thing is telepathy, which is really cool. And it's making me wonder if the one that we just met in our game might be one of these.
Ooh.
But no spoiler.
There's also technically a couple of other ones with the Mark of Hospitality, Mark of Healing, and also Lotus Den. But those are, I know Lotus Den for sure is not in the Bay. I think that's like a homebrew one.
That one you would consider more as a third party. And yeah, any mark of races or species are a part of the Eberron world, which is kind of its own unique setting. It's where Warforged are usually at. Although I think a lot of people have pulled Warforged, so it kind of makes it a little bit of a gray area. I probably would allow the marks. I think that it has some cool, unique flavors to it. Mark of Healing, for example, getting healing touch. That'd be neat.
They even have like innkeeper magic, which I think is the most wholesome as a halfling, or if you're picturing like a hobbit race. They're gardeners, they're farmers, they're innkeepers, and the hospitality is such a big part of their sort of racial identity that I think it's really cool that they made it sort of a subclass in the Eberron setting. The innkeeper's magic gives you purify food and drink and unseen servants and prestidigitation, and you can use charisma to cast them. And I just thought that was really cool.
One fun fact about the halflings is their family names can, not typically, but they can start as nicknames. And then their nicknames essentially stick to them so strongly that they become passed down through generations as their family names. That is something that is a little fun fact about halfling culture.
So like you might be a halfling if in like 2 more generations your whole family's actual name is Tukey.
Yeah, I mean that's fair and possible. Speaking of how they live as well, like I mean this is personalities, right? The books do offer some baselines for their personalities. We talked a little bit about this earlier with them being brave or being kind, being loyal. They are also very practical. They don't necessarily tend to live in exuberance. And again, none of these are hard, fast rules that you have to follow, but
they're good guidelines.
Yeah, some base things to go by if you're looking for inspiration. They're also very curious, as they can be nomadic. They are also kind of opposite of that, but they're community driven. So when they do settle, whether it's again with other halflings or humans, elves, someone else, they are very much focused on bettering that community or being a part of that community. And then solutions wise, this one's actually kind of interesting because this, how your character might approach things, they tend to look for more straightforward solutions as opposed to something complicated.
Most species having this good guideline is great to differentiate species because a lot of them, it can feel very samey aside from just that they look different, which is good. But at the same time, these are uniquely different where some of them are actually reptiles. Some of them are like biologically, they're actually completely different versus, the way that humans are the same, just slightly different skin tones, for example. And I think that with a halfling having the guideline of like being nice and gentle and, adventurous or brave is a good guideline. And then you can even just twist it, go the opposite, or have where, let's say you're kind of a dark, gloomy halfling, but you're actually fighting the fun of it. So every now and then there's a party going on and, one of the players has noticed you like tapping your toes or something because you just can't help your instinct of the joy of the little things.
I'm not having a good time at this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that reflects a lot their origin, which is that they were really inspired by the hobbits, because in all of the Tolkien lore, that's why they kept picking hobbits to carry the ring, right? Is that they were these positive, unflaggably optimistic, like good-hearted people, and that the evil and the corruption just had a harder time reaching them.
And they were so underestimated that the evil never even considered them an option.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, what are some of our ideas for maybe some sort of personality of them?
So my first gut instinct when I think of a halfling, and I don't exactly know why, but I think of like a happy-go-lucky bard traveling around.
Yeah.
So I do think that would probably be my default for a bard or a halfling, is to make it maybe, like I said, the bard class. Now with the circle of dance, or college of dance, I probably would go with that one. And then they would just be a traveling, dancing, happy-go-lucky halfling who's just going around spraying a good time.
That sounds so adorable.
It does. I think my first one, since they look like small humans, I would just create a character alongside another probably player character that would pretend to be their child. I'd have like baggy pants. I'd have like baggy pants and a cloak to like block my proportions to make it look more like a child. And then they wouldn't look towards me probably as like dangerous when surprised. And then I shank the gambler for cheating or something.
I was immediately thinking that they'd be like a rogue. Just
yeah. just something that conceals the identity. You think, oh, look at the little youngster. And I'm like, haha, I'm 76. And then, stab him.
Just based on the deception alone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, this feels roguey. My default was probably druid, just because of the gardening aspect.
They feel very druid
of everything. Yeah, very druid, or maybe even a cleric because of the healing and the hospitality and things like that. But it would be fun to have. So in the campaign we're in now, I am playing a human druid, and she's Circle of the Spores, but I also have the herbology kit and alchemist, proficiency, and I'm doing a lot of herbology and crafting and making potions and stuff, and it's really fun. But I would love to play a halfling where all of the mechanics were just garden based, where it's basically Animal Crossing, but like in D&D, where you're like, I would come on this many side quests with you guys, but I have to sell my turnips today at the market. And then secretly the big bad of the whole game is like Tom Nook or something.
Our halfling healer was a farmer, so that's pretty funny there too.
Yeah, it just seems like a natural fit.
It does.
Now here's a dark turn to that, right?
Oh, I've got one.
Your
too.
halfling. Yeah, here we go. So your halfling just spent most of their life. They had a nice farm going. Everything was good. And then they came in the night and burned their farm.
Oh no.
And after that, they awoken to become a druid, Circle of Wildfire.
Ooh.
Lawful evil, going about the lands, destroying anyone who decides to destroy their nature.
Ooh.
That's all I got.
Nothing like a little immolation between friends.
Yeah. I do like the kind of dark turn style of a halfling, which also to other people, especially who know the lore, go, man, something must really happen to you to be like this. It's not going to be something that's like, oh, that's just the aggressive race being aggressive. No, that's not usual for a halfling.
It's like the quiet one where you're like, or the really loyal one, right?
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to be super loyal. So it's like, what is the saying about like never push a loyal person too far?
Right.
Because it's like they give you 100 chances, but on that 101st chance, like that last time you screw them over, like nothing is more vengeful. And yeah, that would be sad though to see. I mean, we've already seen in one of our campaigns a very slow, painful descent into evil.
What?
And you were like not super great to begin with. I feel like if a halfling did it, would be even sadder.
Yeah. I, due to like spooky time, have sort of another one anyway, because I kind of wanted to keep the idea of halflings being happy and practical mindsets and taking pleasure of the little things, but then just adding a little level of creepy to it. So you guys are, you know the movie Megan, perhaps from the Blumhouse right there.
I loved that movie.
That basically be the character. Just replace all the limbs with prosthetic ones.
Oh no.
If the DM allows the prosthetic limbs, which are an actual item, beef up their strength to be like that freakishly strong for their size and act a little like stilted with their movements. But what makes it like eerie and kind of creepy is that they're still really happy and enjoy things, but they just don't seem human enough that you're like, okay, are you real?
You went real dark with this one.
Well, it's also leaning even more into the hospitality, right? Because Megan was like the caretaker for the little
exactly.
kid. So it's the same thing, but they're just like aggressively like protecting you, but in a way that they're not letting you know that the guy that looked at you sideways at the tavern, after everybody went to sleep that night, you went into his room and slit his throat.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't, like the players know, even knowing the reference or understanding something like the reference, like let's say Terminator or something like that too, the player character may never actually like snap like that, but it's always in the back of the minds of like, oh, but what if? And I think that's a kind of a little fun play with it where the whole campaign, they're just this happy person that's like a little bit weird. Are they a robot? We don't know. But when's the moment? And then it just never happens.
There's also a lot. I mean, there's a lot of ways to make happy creepy. I mean, there's like the midsummer scenario.
Yeah, that'd be a fun halfling one too. Yeah.
Yeah, just eternally happy and part of the earth, but it's like because you really drank the Kool-Aid and actually you're, a warlock or something, and there's something really crazy going on in your brain, and there's just even just the toxic positivity scenario where character maybe might be a little bit annoying because you're trying to be like, man, today was just so rough because half our party died, and they're just like, yeah, but other people have it worse. And you're like, dude, shut up.
I mean, if you're looking for a real small idea, you could even just do a halfling. I was thinking more of a comical one now, but a halfling who is a little bit taller for a halfling, and he's
shocking.
Wow.
But he's just no. Okay, hold on. But he has like a thing about it. So he's always trying to make himself small. He hates it if anyone, like he wants to be smaller. He has basically a complex. So that would be kind of a minor one, but you just do funny things with spells to always make yourself slightly smaller or where you stand or what you do. I would though. I mean, I would be the one to make a halfling and they would be like a human size somehow.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even know.
You even ask like the DM, like, "Hey, can my halfling be medium size?"
I want him to be large. My halfling is 10 feet tall at all times.
He's half of a giant. You're actually just a giant, but half of.
But like because they're the same proportions as a human, at that point they're just a big human.
Yeah,
but it's still a half. It's weird at that point. A giant halfling. It's like, well, okay. Just a human.
Well, maybe halflings could still get giantism.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And then it's a human with very hairy feet. I think that's what we would discover with that.
Oh, I was going to say, when you're picking out their magic items, you can't have anything that's footwear.
Yeah, true.
Oh.
They have to always be barefoot.
That's just
uncomfortable. Like the true aesthetic of it.
I mean, they especially can't wear metal shoes or else a certain monster is gonna, eat them.
Oh no, there's not one here now, is there?
It already took my shoes.
Oh no.
Wait, why'd you have metal shoes?
Welcome to Dissectional, a segment where we ask biological D&D monster questions that no one else was wondering about. Tonight, we take a look at one of the very first monsters ever to grace the D&D menagerie. And it's not even lethal to players. The Rust Monster. Picture this. It's the 1970s.
Okay.
Gary Gygax, a dude who likes to play a lot of nerd games,
What a
was playing
nerd.
Chainmail, a war game that is a little bit of a precursor to D&D. And he was getting ideas and he was like, I need inspiration for monsters. And as the story goes, one day he was shopping around at a store and came across a bag of small plastic toys. They were just called prehistoric animals. They were made in Hong Kong and they had kaiju in them, such as Ultraman and Godzilla. You know, a very like Ready Player One sort of like mixed bag of creatures.
Whoa.
One of them looked like an absurd lobster with a propeller at the end of it.
Rock lobster?
He picked it out of the bag and he thought, this is going to be the Rust Monster. And so in the 1970s, the Rust Monster was born.
Wow.
I mean, rust is scary.
Terrifying, especially if it's on your car or your boat or your plane or your train or your automobile.
Or if you were a car.
So this creature is one of the very first monsters that was ever entered into the D&D lexicon. It is kind of the size of like a small horse or a cow. And basically its whole thing is Gygax thought it would be funny to have a creature that didn't hurt the party, but would devour their metal items, destroy all their possessions. And it has gone through a lot of different iterations over the years. It went from only being able to eat or destroy ferrous metals to being able to destroy all metals as long as they were non-magical, and then kind of back again. It went from not having a bite attack to having a bite attack. It went from being an aberration to being a beast to being something. It's been a little bit of everything throughout the editions, but it's made the jump every time. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's basically a creature that can smell ferrous metal from a really long way away. It's terrifyingly fast. It actually started off fast and just kept getting faster as the editions continued to come out. And it just sneaks up on you, and all of your ferrous metal-based worldly possessions turn into rust and blow away in the wind.
No.
How does that make you feel?
I mean, to make it even more scary, there's even a rumor or sage speculation that rust monsters can become dragon wormlings.
Ooh.
Essentially through a process of cocooning themselves.
Yeah, which actually is really cool if you think about the origin of the idea of the rust monster in the first place, coming from a bag of plastic kaiju toys. So, you know, maybe it originally was some sort of dragon larva, and now it is again in the fantasy world.
I think, and this isn't part of their lore directly, but that kind of inspires, say, me to have it where they accumulate so much metal, and maybe it's a particular kind that, let's say, silver, and then they become a silver dragon.
Ooh.
The larva stage and all that other stuff. And that'd be kind of a cool idea. It had to be like an absurd amount, like they just ate almost half a mountain to where they just were so engorged that they had to mutate, basically. That would be kind of a cool idea for a rust monster. I kind of like that.
I was actually wondering, even without the mutation, I mean, I know the rust monsters don't really differentiate between what they eat. They just eat any metal they turn to rust. But it would be interesting, like you're saying, if one had a constant diet of iron versus titanium or something, would the one be any different than the other? You know, after some time of just constantly eating it, you know, maybe the DM could even change the stats or something. But yeah.
Not only that, but I think that their look, like they kind of have a copperish look, and I think it could switch to, like I said, a silver or an iron or more of a steel look, depending on, you know, what they digest. To me, I think that rust monsters are as attracted to metal as rats are to food. I think that they're just rats for metal, personally. I think it's a super neat concept to throw around like subterranean environments. I think the easiest example is dwarves being one of the most common likely places to find them. And I even think an interesting character hook could be to free a group of like Warforged from rust monsters as they're unable to fight them without rusting away. Just there's lots of cool concepts you can create with this, and even like character plot hooks or backstories and stuff that don't really need to go that far, but could lead to more. Because, like you said, if they can, even if they can't become dragons or dragonborn or anything like that, they could be around those kind. Maybe they eat the scales off of metallic dragons, for example.
Yeah. Also, as far as ideas for scenarios that they might be useful for, I thought a really interesting tidbit I learned about them was that when the 4th edition came out, all their stats and stuff pretty much stayed the same as 3rd edition, but the speed was doubled. And then it upgraded the bite a lot, so it could actually finally be dangerous to the players. So it would do a bite, and then if it bit successfully, it would corrode the metal only on a successful bite.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they added was if it ate a magical weapon, the residuum, the substance that gives the magic weapon its power, would stay in the stomach. So if you killed it, you could harvest it, you could retrieve the residuum, and you could make new weapons. So I think a fun plot hook for this would be somebody who's collecting, evil weapons or dark weapons, any weapon that you don't want to be out in the world that like can't be destroyed another way. You could feed it to the rust monster, and then you could reharvest the raw residuum and forge it into something new.
That is a cool way to reforge things. There's another neat concept where you could even create a new plot hook where you're actually finding rust monsters to do exactly that.
Yeah, like you kind of make a pet out of it.
Yeah.
That was actually the one thing I was wondering is if you could actually train one. I mean, imagine in a dwarven society, they actually were able to somehow train these things, maybe provide it with its own a source of rust that satiates it enough to not go after the rest of what they have. You could use this to find large, metal veins essentially in the mountains. These creatures can basically seek it out. So it'd be kind of cool if you could somehow tame one of them and use it as a metal finding source, or a ferrous metal finding source.
Absolutely. Or even if there was a blockage or something that needed to be cleared that was a ferrous, like, can you imagine if the wall from our last campaign, it was like mostly metal and then it was enchanted, but it was also just like mostly metal, the wall between the rifts for the hell plane. Like if you just opened a door and Randy, you built that wall, what would have happened if a bunch of rust monsters had been in there with it?
I mean, luckily, like you said, it was magical. However, yeah, they could have been another alternative plot point where the rust monsters maybe over time were slowly over, I don't know, let's just say 100 years, were corroding it, that it was weakened enough that, the devils could bypass it. The devils kind of were doing their own thing on the inside of it to try to create devices and stuff that could kind of pop it out a little bit, but it was impossible without the assistance on the other side, which is what they needed. But the rust monsters could have done that for them, and theoretically they could have come out without the assistance of the war. So yeah, that would have been a really cool separate idea to have incorporated.
Cool. Now that we're in a siege campaign, forget I ever said anything.
Okay, it's all sewn.
And also just to cover a few like stat related or function related things that we may not have covered yet. These rust monsters, essentially any non-magical weapon that hits them begins to corrode. And how that would work in the actual combat, I think it gets like a -1 damage each time it hits them. And then once it stacks up to 5, the weapon essentially breaks. This is for non-magical. Ammunition's a little bit different. Ammunition basically hits, does its damage, and then is destroyed on these creatures. So you're not getting that arrow back.
No recovery.
Yeah. And they can also...
No, my favorite arrow.
And they can also use their antennae to corrode non-magical objects within 5 feet of them. So they have a few different ways to basically corrode metal objects around them.
I also thought that if you want to be a little bit devious, you could have them show up while the party's sleeping, and in only a few minutes, the rust monster like takes away all their equipment, and then now they wake up with all their equipment gone, and it doesn't take long enough that they could easily kind of sneak through a watch or something too if they rolled low enough. They don't really have much to stealth or something, but it's a little bit of dex, so it kind of does it from there. But Ginger, how would you kill the party with it?
I think it would be interesting to have the party need to come up against some kind of fortified small outpost, but it's a group of people, and it could be big or little depending on the scale you want. Like, it could be just a bandit stronghold if you want, but basically it's a whole group of people that doesn't use metals, but they have basically tamed a bunch of the rust monsters, and they use them as mounts in battle. They're like the size of a cow or a horse or something. So these people are using stone, primitive weapons, or they're just casting magic, but they have these mounts that act as like a secondary shield effect against whatever weapons the party would be bringing at them. And they would have, I would give it maybe like a mount stat where like it has a charge or something like that, charge attack. But yeah, I think it would be cool to just try to fight through a group of defenders that were literally riding these things. Also, they're insanely fast. Like, they're way faster than you. So I think that would be a fun way to shake the party up a little.
It's funny you say that, because my way of defeating them is the same way that they're tamed. So sneaking up on them is nearly impossible with their iron scent. So screw all metal objects. But you could probably prioritize wooden weapons too. And it's a great opportunity for druids or spellcasters like wizards or sorcerers to handle these kinds of creatures. So I would just have non-metal armor and weapons and stuff and just combat them with that. It's kind of like, I feel like a pretty easy way and probably the most obvious way to handle them.
I had a few here. I feel like one, you could use its metal sense against it. So if you were going to try to create a trap for it, basically
attract it.
Yeah, attract it to a large enough metal source. Obviously, like you're saying, ditch all of your metal sources, get it to go somewhere, and then
throw it in a wooden box.
Essentially limit its movement. Yeah, like limit its movement or trap it or surround it. It also has lower saves, I think, on average. So using magic is probably a good thing against it. And flashback to last week, but depending on how the ruling goes with it, you might be able to use heat metal on it. I know this would...
I was wondering that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's like oxidization process goes on, so there could be some arguments it wouldn't work on it, but you could always heat metal on something as it eats it too. So some sort of metal thing, heat metal, it eats it, now it's inside of it.
I think as a IRL podcast ruling, I probably wouldn't allow it on the monster, but like you said, because it's a monstrosity, it's not like a construct or something. There is that kind of gray area, but it doesn't specify that it itself is made out of metal. But definitely, like what it would eat, you could kind of argue it would even digest the metal, and then the contents inside would still be burning. So it
get a little bit of damage on it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have that much HP. So honestly, just probably 3-4 rounds of just heat metal would take it out, guaranteed.
And one more fun fact. We've had a lot of fun facts in this one. One more fun fact here. You can actually take the rust monster's antennae and use them to create something that is called a rust blade, which essentially has the same effect as what their antennae do. It corrodes things. But if the rust monster ever touches the blade, and they actually seek these out like even more than regular metal, they're just like super attracted to them. If they touch it, or if that rust blade ever touches it, it just becomes a pile of metallic goo. And these rust monsters find that metallic goo irresistible and nourishing to them.
This is one of those monsters that the player would potentially bring up to the DM maybe not knowing this monster and mentioning something like the antennas that you were saying, and use it as a new quest. And I think this is a cool monster regardless of DM or player. And that's a great idea for a player to try to obtain that weapon. Maybe there's some reason to use the rust. I mean, there could be multiple reasons, including like just corroding a wall to get through it. Like if it's a metal wall or door or whatever, you just knock out the hinges.
Yeah, but then no matter where you are in the world, like there's always a rust monster coming for you. Like it'll give you this ever-present sense, like the Terminator, like they're out there looking for the blade you stole.
Well, maybe our new friend will take care of it then.
Maybe I'll have a rust blade.
Can I have a rust blade?
No.
This is the Flash Round, where we take turns creating the bones of a character that anyone can use. If you play one, let us know who they become. All right, let's roll initiative. I already rolled, so.
Oh, I rolled 2.
No, I already rolled.
Wait, you rolled a 2? Wait, who's on first?
Randy is.
Yeah, because I got a nat 20.
I don't believe you.
Nat.
Okay, I'll show it to you. Here, look. It's with my metal dice.
You
see it?
No. I got a 15.
I got a 17.
What? How am I? Bunch of cheaters.
Cheaters! I did not cheat.
Cheater, chicken, eater.
Well, with those false rolls put into place, it looks like we got Randy, followed by Ginger, followed by Tukey.
Randy, I can't eat chicken.
My head hurts. I took a lot of psychic damage recently, so I'm happy for the nat 20 for once.
Well, good. And you get to kick us off.
I took a lot of psychic damage, so I don't know. I don't remember what happened this week, so I'm just. We talked about Genasi at some point. I'm gonna do a Genasi. Fire Genasi because my head feels like it's on fire.
Wow.
You should get that checked out.
No.
I feel like most of our flash ons end up with us telling Randy to get stuff checked out.
Hey, I do a lot of things for this podcast, okay?
Okay. I think that the Fire Genasi should be a sorcerer.
Why, though?
Because they can do a lot of... it'll depend on what you pick, but they can do a lot of crazy stuff with their fire. And
well, it's pretty obvious that which subclass I'm going to pick. Because, Randy's head was hurting, right? So they have to be an aberrant mind sorcerer.
Oh, cool. Okay, so for their appearance, then they're going to be almost entirely in flames, but their head is going to be encased in sort of a molten skull. But when they use their aberrant mind, the pieces start to kind of almost float on top of fire as they're using their abilities.
Do the flames turn blue when they're using their psychic stuff?
Ooh, no, they'll actually turn a little bit purple.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for their background, they're going to be an urchin. This real scrappy, kid off the streets.
But why okay, no, I'm not going to keep asking that. Because for their personality trait, I'm going to say, well, you said they're all fiery, right? I'm going to say they're always cold. So they're just always putting lots of layers on, even though they are on fire. So people are just going to be kind of looking at them being like, what shouldn't they be warm? What is going on? And they're just always in heavy clothing.
But is their personality also cold?
Ooh, well, okay, that could translate to their flaw, because their flaw, they're kind of a mean girl or boy, whatever, or they. They get a little hot-headed every now and then and kind of lash out.
It's a really good original idea there.
Thanks.
All right, for their item or trinket, it is going to be a compact that they carry in their bag that was something they took off of a noblewoman when they were a kid on the streets.
Ooh.
It'll have some kind of powder in the bottom of it, and then when you open it, there's a mirror in the top. But is the powder laced with poison? Is it just makeup? No one really knows for sure.
Well, there is one thing I know for sure.
Cocaine.
No.
Cocaine!
There is one thing I know for sure, and it's their name. They will be known as Cubka Kubka. Kubka.
No wonder they're mean all the time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this session and want to hear more, you can find us on Twitter at dysfictionalpod for our latest updates and downloads.
Original music for this podcast is provided by Joshua Silver, the artist known as Dimanon on Spotify.
And remember, your cleric is an essential worker. You need to pay them more. Their spells are expensive.